Hey everyone! Before we dive in, we want to give a big shout out to TACA, the Arts Community Alliance, and Moody Fund for the Arts. This season of Dance Behind the Screen podcast is powered in part by their support. Because of them, you're getting free episodes wherever you listen, full video interviews on YouTube, and our amazing guests receive an artist stipend. If you love what we do and want to support the work, head over to knowvoxdance.com. All right, let's get into it.
No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념 이란 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Welcome to Dance Behind the Screen, where dance, technology, and creativity converge. I'm your host, Marthea, and today we're diving into a compelling conversation about identity, collaboration, and the evolving landscape of dance with a visionary voice from Dallas dance community. Our guest today is Ray Barnard, a dynamic queer Dallas-based choreographer and performer known for crafting contemporary dance works that are deeply rooted in lived experience and bold artistic vision. With a background in both dance and biology, Ray seamlessly fuses movement, science, and immersive storytelling to push the boundaries of what dance can be. Today's episode explores how they navigate collaboration, technology, and transformation in the arts. Ray, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. That's such a nice introduction. My goodness.
Well, you're easy to introduce. And like I said in the intro, your work really is deeply exploring identity and connection and movement. So I'm wondering, how has this shaped your approach to creating works?
So when I first started choreographing, I just really felt the deepest sense that I didn't want my dance to only be about me. I remember thinking, if I'm going to start a career as a performer and a choreographer, like it would feel so limited if my work only ever reflected my perspective and my life experience. So I felt very drawn to working with people that I either knew or people that were very open to sharing their experiences, because I imagined it would be a much more rich creative process and a much richer audience viewer experience if the work was infused with multiple perspectives. And also coming out of a suburban lifestyle and being raised there and then going into college and being massively exposed to a lot more diverse communities and experiences, it felt very important to incorporate diverse perspectives and let the work inherently be that. And I just found it so beautiful how asking people to create something together will just naturally reflect who they are. So when I do lead my process, essentially that's at the heart of it, is I want the end product to reflect the diversity of the people in it and everything that they have lived through. So I draw a lot from the processes of Pina Bausch. I'm really inspired by Bill T. Jones, especially thinking about, the documentary that was made about his work, Still Here. That I think it was the 30th anniversary last year. So it's a lot of open-ended questioning and conversation in process, a lot of improvisation-based work to craft the content. And then within that, we always want to consider how our audience is a source of connection and when we can have opportunities for connection in real time. So there's always this fluid connection between a performer within themselves, a performer with the other performers on stage, a performer with the viewers or audience members or other participants, and also all of those people with the space that you're being in and the context of the culture that you're performing the work in. It's a very broad and open-ended answer, but yeah.
I love that. And I too feel the same way as a maker. And even here at No Box Dance, I think so much of what we do is not about us, right? It's centered around you in relationship with others, your work in relation to the world. There's just so many exciting access points for people to appreciate and experience art. So I love that. I thought it'd be really interesting for our audience to know a little bit more about you.
You are listening to No Box Dance.
You have a background in biology, which is very interesting. So I'm wondering, can you explain your relationship of biology, dance, and then how those kind of intersect and affect what you're doing currently?
Yes, I can't remember a time that I think I wasn't fascinated with like something related to biology. As a child, I was that kid that like loved animals and insects and was like down in the dirt picking out worms kind of person. I just always thought I was like picking flowers and wanted to know how the clouds work. So, one of those kids that like asks why constantly. So by the time I got to like high school, I was just fascinated by like how the human body worked. I remember I, was dancing since I was a child. And I remember just being fascinated with like, how does our body learn how to do different things? How does our metabolism work? So I remember in high school, I think my desire at first was to do biochemistry and potentially leading that into like a nutrition and exercise science kind of form so that I could have this very like anatomical understanding of dance. And I thought I was just like going to be a scientist and dance on the side. And then I got into college and started doing that and realized I really, really like choreographing and performing. So I found myself actually pursuing scientific research and like really deep diving into essentially how do we uncover new knowledge in our world, like how do we go about doing that in an empirical way? How do you go from this kind of open-ended empirical research process into making work that has real tangible impacts on a particular group of people? So I was in the lab of Dr. Dwayne Winkler, which is a biophysical chemistry lab. We did crystallography, protein purification. I was growing a lot of yeast and bacteria cells and doing gel electrophoresis, among all sorts of other things. But basically, they were studying proteins and enzymes associated with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. And at first, I thought it was like kind of cold. You're like in this just semi-dingy place, indoors, no windows, all day long, and doing the same sort of processes and making these tiny tweaks. And I remember talking to they call it the PI, like principal investigator, like the head of the lab, and hearing her talk so passionately one day about like describing essentially what an ALS patient would go through as their condition progresses and how this research that seems like so conceptually distant, like taking it all the way down to essentially a molecular level of how does this even start? How do these enzymes cause the neurological changes that lead to this disease? And connecting that to this like a very visceral corporeal experience and the emotional effects it has both on the individual, their family, and bringing that all kind of full circle, connecting this very empirical, data-driven, specific scientific work to this visceral, intense, emotional, lived experience was very powerful for me. And when I ultimately shifted focus into choreography, just that like passion for both knowing the thing on a very detailed level and knowing the lived experience and that, again, just that visceral experience is so, I don't know, it's like special. There's something about interweaving those two things together. So I love being very, no, I love to stay curious about the world around me. I love to, constantly think about how things came to be as they are. I love to constantly question what's there. I love in my process, like I was saying before, I like ask the questions why and how and why again until we kind of get to the core of whatever emotional experience we're trying to tap into and building from there. So it's like this constant flow between like, what is this thing in words, in description, and what does this thing feel like in a way that I can't describe, and like constantly going back and forth between those things, between like what we know and what we feel.
I think that's so interesting and something that resonates a lot with the work we're doing at NoBox. We're very interested in how technology is enhancing the dance world, not replacing the embodied experience, but rather using it as a tool to enhance that experience. And as you're talking, it makes me wonder, like, how are you seeing with the evolution of technology, the relationship between this data-driven practice and this felt experience shift and transform, or are you seeing a change?
I think I try to seek out work that does do exactly what you're talking about, where I see the exploration of technology as something to enhance an embodied experience or experiment with a different type of embodied experience. I think about, I was actually just looking at it this morning. Andrea Costanzo Martini does some like kind of interesting with like very contemporary, I would describe it as dance theater, has to me a queer edge to it, but like very simply used, it looked like tablets or iPads where they did recordings of their own face and I think used a text to speech voice and has it just held in front of a dancer's face while they're on stage. So you have these three elements of like a disembodied voice that like might have come from a human at some point, and then just the facial expressions of this choreographer who's not on stage, and then the body of a dancer who's like presently with you. At least two different types of digital technology to have what feels like three people in one space all kind of together, but you're still connected in this embodied experience because you have the choreographer and you're seeing their face. And you have this body of this now anonymous individual. In another sense, I see Axis Dance recently had some articles written about them in New York Times, which, if you don't know, is a company that mixes like traditionally able-bodied dancers and differently able dancers performing together. And they collaborated with engineers at UC Berkeley to develop these kind of unique mobility tools that, to a similar point, were designed with the intention to enhance or expand what somebody's body could do and aren't just there necessarily to take a differently abled body and, you know, bring it up to what we would consider an able body. So it's a wheelchair that can be shifted using just like where the pelvis is and where you're shifting your weight, or these telescoping crutches that they described as like they want to use all this force behind it to like throw somebody's body in the air at first, or this kind of table that you can sit on has 6 legs that this dancer can now use instead of like our typical 2 legs or 4 limbs. So I get very excited, seeing artists collaborating across different technologies and different fields, which is like a whole other point I can go into. And I love seeing artists using these technologies to enhance an embodied experience or kind of like cross embodied experiences over space and time in a way that we otherwise wouldn't be able to, just being bodies in a space.
What I'd really love to talk with you about is how you're approaching identity in both the creative process, but then in also the marketing and promotional process of your works.
I think the maybe like ground level that I try to approach identity from is both considering individual identities and then collective or cultural identities is a really nice starting point. Similarly, I think a lot about what identities are given to us and what identities we choose for ourselves and how those can overlap at times. I think above all, I always want to prioritize self identity as much as possible. So if when I'm casting a work or auditioning people for a work, I try to be mindful in that process of trying to choose people that I know as much as I can have different lived experiences than me so that I'm challenged in my own biases and assumptions during that process, but also knowing that I can't know the person entirely. And that part of the creative process is going to be me getting to know them and hopefully them getting to know themselves a bit better. I think incorporate into the promotional materials.
Yeah. And I asked that because I think I felt like a lot of our listeners would really resonate with creating work about identity, right? Because art is a reflection of your experiences, essentially. And I think it'd be really helpful to hear how you think about sharing and disseminating the message of your work, whether it be workshops or your performances and things like that. Some real practical tips, like how are you thinking about the language? How are you thinking about the social media content that you're sharing, whether it be images or videos?
So I also will say when working with identity, it's a very broad concept. And if I'm trying to touch diverse participants, diverse performers, diverse viewers and audience members, there's a balance between being mindful and like very open with language and being specific about what you're going to do. So I want to always ensure that people know what they're getting into, because that just kind of comes with keeping things accessible and keeping things safe and consensual, and not defining exactly what the experience has to be so that people feel open to showing up as they are and not feeling like they're already excluded before they walk in the door. So
Yeah.
there
And
is
that it feels like so tricky, especially with dance. We have a lot of conversations with people who feel like dance feels like the secret club. And like you go to a dance performance and like you don't know the language and you didn't get the password and you're sitting there and you're like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what am I supposed to look for? What am I watching? And that's one thing we're working really hard is to create those experiences where people just feel comfortable to show up in their jeans and t-shirt, whatever, and feel like open to try something new and do something a little bit different.
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear kind of like your thought process around that. And if you have like concrete tips for how you approach that, that'd be amazing.
trying to make things accessible to our community. I think the first thing I want to consider is with how I'm disseminating that information. Just there's lived knowledge and practical knowledge of like who's going to use what. So knowing what audience I'm trying to reach. I do a lot of work in Oak Cliff, and I know that people most likely to engage in something like a dance workshop for first time people is gonna be like young adults to maybe like middle-aged adults, unless I'm doing something targeted for an older community. So I know my routes are like social media generally for a younger crowd. It needs to be like on someone's timeline. It needs to also be in my stories because different people use social media differently. I don't use Facebook, but a lot of my friends who are like 35 plus, like that's where they are on a lot of time. It's also just some people's preference because it moves a little slower, I'd say. So I have to cover a handful of social media platforms to capture that audience. And I've also found a nice amount of effectiveness from just flyers, honestly. There's a really interesting shift, at least in my kind of smaller, my bubble of social people, of wanting to be in lived in-person community with people. So I've actually made the effort to go and put flyers up at my like coffee shops. I was out hanging in posters on telephone poles the other day because I did it once and people who were like in their 20s and 30s showed up. They're like, yeah, I was hanging out at the coffee shop with my friends and decided I try this for the first time. So it's surprisingly flyers, social media, and just word of mouth. People will show up to a thing that's at the place they already are. So hosting something at like Arts Mission Oak Cliff, where there's already a lot of art happening in music school lessons, people who are already open to the idea of art being a part of their daily life, than just like see that little snippet of here's a new, slightly different way you could engage art in your life and bringing it in. So I know it's not like a totally unique quote, but Bill T. Jones has said it before in his own process that I appreciate, which is like you have to meet people where they are. You can't. You can try and reach someone that's like, I've never even watched dance before, and I want you to come do this for the first time. But it's going to be intimidating. So there's that effort of trying to meet people in the spaces where they already are with language they understand. So sometimes it's saying, I'm going to dance. Sometimes the word dance is intimidating. So I'll use words like, we're going to move. We're going to have a guided warm up. I'm going to pull from somatic dance, or I'm going to pull from gyrokinesis, or we're going to just, there's going to be some aerobics, trying to use words that people already know so that they feel like they're coming in already with that little bit of knowledge, because you love to feel like you already know what you're doing at least a little bit, and being upfront with this is going to be like a little bit different if this is your first time. So we're going to be silly here. You don't explicitly saying, you don't need experience to be in this room. All levels are welcome. Those are just some of the languaging and like platforming ways that I try to cast a wide but specific net.
I think it's really important to talk about traditional media. Like you said, flyers. That's something that we've been doing from the beginning too. Like you said, like hanging up at coffee shops, restaurants, places where people already are. And that seems to actually be very successful. So I think in this digital age, so many people are kind of discounting some of those more traditional models of media. Like if you can, finding connections to get on the radio or TV or things like that. Because people are still listening to those platforms. They're not only on social media. If anything, I'd be curious your thoughts, but it feels like a lot of people now are spending less time on social media because of all the research that's coming out on the impacts on mental health and things like that. I feel like people are shifting away from spending so much time in that digital world and wanting to spend more time, like you were saying, in real physical spaces, in community together in person.
Create, discuss, and advocate for art. No Box Dance.
No, I agree. I see the same trend, at least in my personal circle. Cannot speak to broader trends. I think, advertising on social media is tricky because as a platform gets more popular and gets more users, it honestly can get much harder to reach people because so many of our social media platforms now, they can stay there because they are effectively ad agencies.
Right.
So they're going like, it's working to put things in front of people that are either going to like have them buy something or continue to engage with the platform to stay on the platform longer. So you do end up, I don't know, like the social media ends up shaping the content that you make for it. And I see a lot of people shifting either towards platforms where people have more control over what they're seeing, like going over to, I know someone who like shifted to Substack just to like send out a newsletter for what they're doing as a choreographer and dance maker every month. I see more people making their own email newsletters just as it seems like it can be a more reliable way to get to your audience more directly and have less worry about getting lost in this flood. Because even in my own sense, I've had to use feeds, like I use Instagram a lot, and I've had to start using the feature where you can favorite an account just so I feel like I'm not missing the things I care about for these, usually organizations either in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. And it's like this battle between, well, I don't want to sign up for 120 email lists. And I feel like if I'm not really intentional about it, I'm going to miss the news about the show that I'm interested in, or that like call for choreographers, or that workshop I would have wanted to go to. Balance of wanting to be on all the platforms where people are so that I can reach everyone, and wanting to make sure I'm on platforms that are going to actually effectively help me reach those people. And I'm really interested in seeing how people are trying different mixes of tools to reach whatever audience they need.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, one thing that we've learned is it's important to kind of have at least one like digital platform that you have ownership of, whether it be like your website or your newsletter or something like that, where you are owning the content. A social like TikTok went out, and I know so many people were freaking out if you're reliant on some of these platforms to not only archive your content and share your content, but also to make money off of. I think that doesn't really provide too much security or a sustainable outlook. That's not to say we're not using Meta like Instagram and Facebook to share organic content, and also, putting a little bit of our marketing budget towards that when we're promoting things like our festival. But I think it's really important, at least we've found, to kind of have our own website, at least as kind of that home base where we own the content. We can decide how it appears and things like that.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
I'm curious if you identify this way, but I certainly identify you kind of as a solo entrepreneur at this point in your career. And I'm curious, like, what are, I guess, your personal like missions and visions for that career as a solo entrepreneur, whether it be producing your own workshops, your own work? I'd love for you to share more about how you're navigating that journey and being intentional with your goals and your mission and your values as an individual. Because I think there's so many people who are independent artists, and please correct me if you don't feel like you identify this way, interrupt me, but that's how I see it. And I think there's so many who aren't, a part of a larger company or don't have their own nonprofit or LLC, but are independent artists and doing this kind of work. So I'd love to kind of go behind the scenes of that and hear, like, how are you planning it out? How are you being intentional with your time? How do you pick, which grants to go after or which festivals or programs to attend and share your work? I'd just love to kind of dive deeper into that experience.
Oh, a very rich question. Yes, just as reassurance, I would call myself an independent artist or like a solo entrepreneur. Love that one. I'd say, independent artist, and I intentionally maintain strategic partnerships. There are some opportunities for individual artists, speaking at least as someone living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where we do a lot of our like granting systems and public funds really are geared towards nonprofits. I mean, that's just what it is at a national level. There is firstly that balance between I'm an independent artist, and a lot of the time, sometimes I need that support from a nonprofit organization or a corporate sponsor or something that can just... Partnerships are everything when you're trying to make especially larger scale work. For my career, I'm driven by a few different things, I'd say. Firstly, in the vein of kind of what we were talking about earlier, I believe that dance is for everyone, that I want to see a world where dance is not a thing that is performed and viewed. I would like it to be a return to, I guess, dance as something that we do as people, that everyone feels they are allowed to move their body, that they can enjoy moving their body in whatever way they need to. Dance is just a thing that we do. And there's some wonderful like historical and sociological conversations behind that. Secondly, I would love to, within this kind of artistic economy I'm really committed to the idea of thriving local arts ecosystems. So we could go back a few centuries and talk about the patron system and how that started and how essentially it still exists today in the way that, even the National Endowment for the Arts works, or how sponsorship works for established dance companies. We essentially still work in a sort of patron system. That means people who want dance or performing arts to be their career have to end up catering to the tastes of whoever is supporting them. And that's how we also end up with cities that are these so-called like hubs for dance. And people feel like they might have to go to a New York City or a Los Angeles or a Paris or a Berlin to go have a certain type of career that they want. So I'm very interested in what it looks like to be an independent artist invested in a smaller community so that arts are accessible for the people that live there in whatever form, both as like a practice they can do through something like workshops. Like how do we use just community accessible workshops for various ages, for various abilities, so that people feel like they are, again, allowed to move their bodies? And how can I maintain my own personal aesthetic and interests in queer dance and dance theater and contemporary works and collaborative processes that might feel a bit outside of what's common to the area that I'm living in? How, just by being here and being committed to that and finding the people that are also invested in that, how can we make that we craft the arts ecosystem in the local space that I have it, rather than going out somewhere to find it? I want every town to have artists and to reflect their own feelings and not feel like the artists are molded by necessarily only external forces of the culture they live in or the people that are giving money to the arts. It's my very long-winded answer to that.
I think that's so important. And one of the reasons why we started No Box Dance in the beginning, and we're finally finding the right language to describe that feeling. Because like you said, many of us still are independent artists and looking for that community and support systems with the resources to make the art that we want to make, not make the art that is, necessarily going to appeal, like you said, to these big grantors and things like that. Because oftentimes, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but like when you're applying for a grant, sometimes it feels like you do all this amazing work in writing to describe your project, and then you get the grant. And then when you actually start making the work, it feels like you're kind of like chained down by what you wrote in your application for the grant to make that work. And I'm so grateful to be receiving of the grant and the support and the funding and things like that. But it's kind of like hard to learn to like, when do you kind of let go of some of the things that you wrote so then you can enter into the creative process still like open and being able to respond to the people in the room and what you're making. But anyways, that's just me rambling, but I don't know if you've felt that challenge before too.
Yes. I've been reading a lot about grant writing lately, and yeah, it's a slow process. I'm having to tell you exactly what my project is, how I'm going to do it, when I'm going to do it, and why I'm going to do it. And then I need that funding to make the thing,
Right.
but I don't know if I have that funding till months later. The creative process is just faster than that. That's part of what I love about it. And I think that's just part of humans. And I bring it back to biology and how evolution works. Like, everything is an iterative process. So I try to also find granting organizations or partners that understand that, appreciate that. Like, I've worked with the city of Dallas does Arts Activate, which caters to individual artists. And I find that the people there are like pretty nice as far as, they need some specificity around, you want to keep your event dates the same and the venues the same for the sake of like their internal processes. Depending on how I write it, I can give myself space for how the actual thing turns out. Like if the intention is more or less the same than the exact content, I can give myself permission to let it be what it needs to be.
Hmm.
It's tricky, especially like when y'all are a growing organization, you're reaching out to a larger grant that has these very specific mission, vision, and values. Fear in, is my work going to still align for them, or is like the rug going to be pulled out from underneath me? I think especially what's going on right now,
Right.
thinking about like the NEA.
It's so true. And I think it's just such an important conversation to have. And I'm glad we're talking about it. So, those of you who are listening, hopefully you don't feel alone in this journey with funding, especially those of you as independent artists, or if you're running smaller nonprofits or LLCs, who having that funding support from external forces is really key to bringing your ideas to life and sharing them with the world. So I'm just grateful that we've had time to talk about that today, Ray. Is there anything that you want to share with our audience that you feel like we haven't talked about today?
Yeah. I think just on that last point you were talking about, as an independent artist, I think I want to really encourage people that your personal relationships are an incredible source for finding that support for your work. And I think that's part of the beauty of being an independent artist is there's slightly less of the institutional, operational density that comes with a nonprofit. So there's a lot to be said for being very active in your community, for having your face known by local businesses, by the people who work at your library, by the people that are running the cultural centers. Just being places and being known does so much, because then when you're ready to find that venue or get that sponsorship, like it is really as simple as asking people. You will be surprised by how generous people are. And also just knowing how to pitch something as a partnership is so useful. But like truly there is so much power in working as an independent artist, as long as you have just connections, either like on an individual level or with local businesses, local organizations. There's so much to unlock there. Just be present, go be in places. Don't just stay at home, like go be with people, go get to know people.
Well, Ray, I think you're a perfect example of doing that. So congratulations on all the hard work you've put in to being connected with your community and building your community around your workshops and performances and projects. It's really exciting. I feel like we've kind of been in and out of conversation the past few years, but just to see the growth of you as an individual and the work you're doing is really wonderful.
Thank you.
Ray, how do you say no to the box and yes to the future of dance?
Ooh. I'd say first, I want to commit myself to both getting diverse training and experiences and learning opportunities, which means sometimes going out and traveling and experiencing new people from other places. And at the same time, investing in my local dance community. I want to learn in experts, but I also want to work with my peers. And like I said before, I believe that we need to build a dance ecosystem where we are and not just go find the one that already exists.
Flash 4.
It's time for our Flash 4, where we ask all our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash. Are you ready?
Yes.
If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
I'll recommend a book that I'm nearly through right now. It's called The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origins of radical ideas, that follows early to current technologies and the roles that they played in developing revolutions or revolutionary ideas and how they spread through culture.
What was the first dance you saw?
I saw a lot of theater and shows my parents took me to a lot as a child that I don't remember. So I think the first one I remember seeing was probably a Nutcracker by like Texas Ballet Theater or something like that. Whatever it was probably ballet, because I know by the time I was like 5 years old, I was begging to be in a ballet class.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
So I'll tentatively say yes out of optimism for how it can connect people. And I will never, ever want to discount the connection that we can also have through our other mediums in the world.
What's your favorite social media platform?
So one that I really like is called Laps, that you take photos in app, but you don't get to see them for a while before you can share them. But as a solo artist, I will say YouTube has been really great for me as a research source where I can go and watch a bunch of dance that I wouldn't otherwise get to go see. And it's where I get to store a lot of my work without having necessarily the expenses of like other storage websites. So for fun, it's Laps. For business, it's YouTube.
That's great. How can our listeners stay connected with you, and what do you have coming up?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram, which is just ray.barnard. And I also keep my website fairly updated, which is raybarnardmovement.com. I'm also running a monthly somatic contemporary dance workshop series that is guided improvisation, now with some lovely live music every time, which I'm very excited about. And I am also developing a program called ChoreoLab with Lauren Kravitz. That is this low stakes, process oriented space that switches the roles every month of dance makers leading a process and our movers and groovers being in there so that we all get to experience new styles and test out our ideas and have a nice constant exchange of process.
Amazing. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. Ray, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your passion, and your visions with us today. I'm really grateful that you took the time to come on our show and share the journey as an independent artist. And I hope that it can be very useful for our listeners as they're navigating their path of bringing their ideas to life.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Until next time, keep dancing beyond the screen. Thanks for tuning in to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. Keep dancing, keep innovating. See you next time.
Thanks for taking your time to tune in to Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.